Home is where connections are made, memories are formed, and ideas are born. And no one knows home better than NFM. Thanks for tuning in to I Am Home, the podcast that goes deeper than trends and dives into what it means to make your house a home.
Welcome back to another episode of I Am Home. It's Tyler Weiskup here recording from NFM headquarters with our smooth sound superwoman, Becca said that.
Hi, Tyler.
Hi, Becca. And Hillary Waltemath, our visual display general manager.
Hey.
Hi, Hillary. And for the month of April, we are talking all about sustainability. And for today's episode, we're getting into the wonderful world of gardening and how gardening plays a role in a more sustainable future. And we have a special guest for that. But before we introduce him, I want to tell you why we're even doing this podcast. And that's because NFM is more than just your everything home store. We're in the business of improving lifestyles because your home life should be your best life. And I'm going to pass it over to Hillary to take the lead on this as kind of the resident more gardener expert on our team.
That's a pretty low bar. So we are so thrilled to have you as a guest here, expert guest here for our topic today. Want to officially welcome Scott Evans to the I Am Home podcast.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Yes. So before we dive into all things gardening, I want to share a little bit about what makes you our subject matter expert with our listeners. So you are currently a horticulture program coordinator for the University of Nebraska Extension and have worked there for over 9 years. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So previously you worked at Mulhall's, a local nursery to Omaha, as a buyer and senior horticulturist for nearly 13 years.
Almost.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then you studied environmental geology and biology with an emphasis on botany, ecology, and environmental science at Northwest Missouri State.
That is right.
And then you earned your master's degree in agriculture from the University of Nebraska Lincoln.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to throw a Go Big Red in there.
Yeah.
So,
what a resume. Goodness.
right?
Yeah,
I know.
yeah.
I know. Like
Definitely an expert.
for
Yeah.
sure.
This isn't just your neighbor who like tools around in the garden.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
No.
This is science.
Yes. Yes. So Scott wanted to maybe get us started by talking a little bit about where your interest in horticulture began and when you decided to pursue a career in education and career in horticulture. I think it's one of those things that is probably more often seen as like a hobby versus a career.
Yes. It started with my parents. I grew up in Council Bluffs. There was a nursery center called Hardeman's Nursery, and my mom would take me there to go get bedding plants every spring.
Uh-huh.
And I'm sure the memory is more romanticized than the actual what happened, but
Naturally.
it was just like the most amazing thing. And then my mom's like, you can study plants. I was like, my mind was blown.
Yeah.
Prior to like every kid, I was going to study dinosaurs. I'm like,
Yeah.
dinosaurs was me. That's my route. But then she's like, you can study plants. I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, this can't be real.
Uh-huh.
And so that was probably in 5th or 6th grade.
Really?
And I was just like, plants.
Wow.
I was dead set
that
on it.
early.
Yeah.
And then, so everything I did was very plant oriented. And I went to school for environmental geology and botany. I didn't know what I wanted to really be when I grew up. So I kept
Mhm.
adding emphasis and
Yeah.
majors. And, but it was just a lot of fun. And then so I started working at Mulhall's Nursery, and it was a great experience. They're a great community partner,
Mhm.
and a lot of hands-on learning.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then I decided to go back get my master's. At the time, UNL did not have a master's in horticulture, so
Okay.
I had to go to agriculture
Got
with
it.
all the horticulture classes. And so that's kind of the route I went. And then a position opened up with Extension.
Uh-huh.
And I was lucky enough to apply and be accepted. So
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And for the month of April, we're kind of focusing our podcast episodes around sustainability and environmental protection. So we wanted to talk about how, gardening for the average person kind of plays a role in sustainability. So could you just maybe talk to us about, in general, how gardening contributes to overall sustainability efforts?
I was doing some reading on sustainability,
Mhm.
and when you start looking it up, it's very overwhelming.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's spooky. And
Mhm.
it's just like, oh my gosh, the planet's going to burn up and
Right.
we're all going to
Right?
go away.
Seriously.
And
Yes.
then, so I'm like, well, when we start making small changes at homes,
Mhm.
like we can have a really big impact.
Mhm.
And we need to manage that expectation of what that impact might be. And it's the local community is kind of what we need to focus in on. And then hopefully that snowballs into larger statewide, maybe countywide programs. So when we start making small changes, it's noticeable. We can have a big impact on our soil health.
Mhm.
We can just by like, do I need to have that lush green lawn?
Right.
Do I need to have that? I'm like, well, it doesn't rain in June, July,
Right.
August.
Uh-huh.
I'm like, that's a waste of water. Can you
Mhm.
let your lawn go dormant?
Mm.
Yes. I mean, so when we start making those small changes, we can have a really big impact and stop putting a lot of input into our lawn because we're trying to force the grass to be green.
Mhm.
And then planting the right plants, trees, and all that fun stuff can
Mhm.
really be impactful. And it gives us as people a sense of purpose and
Mhm.
that we are being part of the solution and not necessarily the problem. And hopefully, word of mouth always seems to be the way how knowledge gets out. It's
Mhm.
not necessarily in the classroom or through seminars. And so if your neighbors kind of pick up what you're doing, it can have those small impacts as well.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good point. I was doing a little research in preparation of our conversation to make sure I could have an intelligent conversation. And I was like reminded of like plants absorb carbon
Mhm.
dioxide. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I haven't thought about that
Yeah.
in a minute. Reminded of that little fact.
Yeah, we forget about a lot of that high school biology
Uh-huh.
stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, plants need carbon dioxide. They put it into their plant parts. They can put it into their roots, take it out of the cycle. They make sugar. They make a lot of amazing stuff.
Mhm.
And so we often forget about just how important they are. But
Mhm.
we really want to make sure that we're choosing the right plants because sometimes we might get caught up in some of those magazines that, ooh, I need to have that plant. Like, well, first off, does it grow here?
Right.
Mhm.
And then
Right.
secondly, will it be successful? Is it going to thrive or is it going to survive?
Mhm.
So those are the questions that we often need to ask ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned, a lot of this knowledge is shared through word of mouth and maybe influencing your neighbors in your neighborhood. What are some sustainable gardening practices that individuals can adopt in their own yard or spaces?
One of the things is we need to know what's in our yard.
Mhm.
So often we buy a home and it comes with the pre-existing landscape. So
Yeah.
you're like, what the heck is this? How does this grow? So taking an inventory of what your plants are, what
Mhm.
they need, and then start looking them up to see is this a high maintenance plant or
Mhm.
is this a low maintenance plant or should I just get rid of it
Mhm.
altogether? And then knowing what you're going to have to work with will really help. And then start having that conversation with yourself and
Mhm.
your spouse, whoever might be sharing the home with you. And what is your expectation?
Mhm.
And what is your gardening practice?
Right.
So often, I mean, I've worked with people that are super excited to like install a pollinator garden. They're like, I have an acre. I want to convert to pollinator gardens. I'm like, let's go with the 10 by 10 footprint. Let's start small because our gardening practices wax and wane.
Uh-huh.
Nobody's going to be out there
Yeah.
July 5th.
Right.
It's
Uh-uh.
110 degrees. Who wants to be outside watering? So have those
Yeah.
not difficult conversation,
Right.
but honest conversation.
Yep.
Mhm.
How are you going to be involved? And then you can start taking a look at your landscape and plant
Mhm.
choices. And something else we often forget about, we pay no attention to, is what's in the soil.
Mm.
Have a soil test
Yeah.
done
Okay.
because we have been conditioned by industry leaders that we need to have that lush green lawn. But if we're just putting something out there blindly, we could be doing more damage than good. Like, we don't take antibiotics just because.
Right.
So we don't want to be putting down fertilizer
Right.
if the grass or if the plants don't need it, or if they are missing something, we can actually put what they just need and reduce a lot of unnecessary input. So
Yeah.
knowing what the soil has, what your plant inventory might be like, and what your gardening practice is going to be is really going to be a big input and have impact on what you're going to put into your landscape.
Yeah.
Where do you get your soil tested? I mean, is it like, I've heard like online stuff? Is that like the best way to do it, or should I be going to my local gardening club?
Here in Omaha, we're very fortunate. There's a company called Midwest Laboratories. They're located off of 132nd and B Street or somewhere
Yep.
where the old skate days used to
Oh,
be.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, we've all.
Now I know exactly.
Yes.
Yes.
And it's an inexpensive test. I mean, we're talking about $20, maybe $25.
Oh, okay.
Don't quote me on that. I haven't looked lately, but it gives you a really good idea because, hey, if something's not looking good, we need to half the plant we can't see because it's in the ground.
Right.
So knowing what's down there is going to be really helpful. And as a side note, unfortunately, parts of Omaha has been in a Superfund site with the lead issues. So depending on where you're at, the city, you might want to have your soil tested for lead if you're going to be doing any type of vegetable gardening.
Right.
Yeah.
So Douglas County has a website, and so does the city of Omaha, to have information about lead mitigation, all that fun stuff. So depending on where you land on the map, you might need to also test for lead.
Yeah. All things I had never really thought of, and even I didn't dig up in my own research. That's fascinating.
When you bring it into Midwest Labs, do you tell them, oh, I also want to do the lead thing? Is that like one go, or are you doing separate?
There's like an online form. You're like, I want this tested.
Sure,
I'm looking for this, and they do have a separate test for lead, and that is an additional cost. But I believe, I mean, there might be some resources out there to help offset the cost. It's not that expensive, but sometimes it could be a limiting factor. So you can, I believe there might be some assistance out there.
Okay.
I also think the expense is worth it if you're going to try to
plant vegetables and lead.
that you grow and ingest.
Yes.
Yeah. I hadn't even thought about that. Wow. So growing up on a farm, I understand on a very base level how important crop rotation is and how that contributes to biodiversity in gardening, and talking about understanding what's in soil and the health of the soil. Can you talk a little bit more about the importance of like biodiversity?
When we look at it from the landscape point, we're going to talk about maybe turf and flowers first. When we start breaking up the landscape into sections, we help reduce disease pressure because we know that, I mean, when we have vast expanse of a monoculture like a row crop or even turf grass, that there's a higher incidence of diseases and insects. So just by breaking up the turf and flower beds, we can start reducing that. But where the real fun comes into is choosing the plants. We can really be mindful and thoughtful about the plants we put into the landscape. That diversity is the spice of life. We can just really create a dynamic yard and ecosystem. Your yard does not have to be big. It can be the tiniest of yards, and you can have a really nice impact on the biodiversity just by choosing from a selection of plants. But we need to be mindful of plants belong to plant families. There's a lot of taxonomy out there. But so looking up those plants to make sure that we're not over sunflower, that group of flowers is the largest family of plants. And so we tend to overplant those by accident because we don't know that one plant they might be in the same family.
Yes.
So do a little bit of homework.
Okay.
And then also diversity. We don't think about, but what's really important is the flower color and the shape and when they bloom. Not all insects are going to go to the same
Right.
type of flower. They
Mhm.
might have different receptors. They might be attracted to a different thing. The flower shape, we don't think about, but bigger insects need a bigger landing pad.
Oh,
Smaller
sure.
insects like smaller flowers.
Mhm.
So, and blooming time, because not all insects are out at the same time.
Mhm.
We have bees that emerge very early. They have a short life meat span. So
Mhm.
they're doing all their business before the first day of summer, and then
Mhm.
they're gone. So we
Yeah.
want to make sure that we have blooming plants from right now until up to the first frost.
Mhm.
So diversify, have lots of fun, but it's easier said than done.
Mhm.
Do your homework about the plants before you buy them. I am so guilty. I will go to the garden center and my cart will be full of
Uh-huh.
like, I don't know what this plant does. But so try to do some homework before
Mhm.
you purchase, so that way you have a map, so you know what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think it makes for like I'm thinking about that a little bit, and that like I want something blooming
Yeah,
all
yeah,
spring, summer
Right.
long.
So
I
you
don't
have
want it to like
something, not just all at once.
yeah,
Right.
and then it dies off. But that there's another reason to like look into that.
Yes, and it's great curb appeal.
Mhm.
I mean, it's always nice to have something in flower. You're the envy
Mhm.
of the neighborhood, and
Yes.
so you have unintentional impact that way too.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So, talk to us about native plants. You mentioned that earlier in talking about like researching plants is and when you're moving into a new home and you're
Mhm.
inheriting a yard garden, is that something that naturally grows here? Why is that important?
When it comes to native plants, that they are adapted to our climate.
Mhm.
Nebraska is a dynamic state, and you know that wait 20 minutes, the weather will
Right.
Yes.
change. And
Seriously.
Uh-huh.
you want plants that can wait 20 minutes and
Uh-huh.
handle that change of weather, because some
Mhm.
of our plants are not adapted to those temperature swings, that they might be a little bit more vulnerable, and then we're having to put more input into that plant, maybe more water or fertilizer, or maybe
Mhm.
even a pesticide. So adapted plants and native plants just have a big advantage because they can tolerate whatever Mother Nature throws at them.
Mhm.
But we also have to manage our expectations. We just can't go out and sprinkle some seeds and expect to have a prairie wildlife. I mean, in a
Yeah.
matter of
Uh-huh.
months. A lot of those plants are really big, and our backyards are usually small.
Mhm.
So knowing what we have, what to plant, because we want to have fun. We want to be
Mhm.
successful. And when we have something that might be a 10-foot plant, I'm like, well, I mean, if it's in the right setting, it's
Mhm.
going to be nice, but sometimes it might not be a good fit.
Yeah.
But native plants just offer so much,
Mhm.
and they just really diversify the landscape. Our native insects are attracted to them. Nebraska is home to over 300 to 500 native bees. We
Oh.
often just think about the
Oh, wow.
bumblebee
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
maybe the honeybee.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And I'll always like to remind people, the honeybee is not native to North America. We brought it over from Europe.
Okay.
But they get all the press. I mean,
Yes.
they need good press,
Uh-huh.
but we got to remember we
Right.
have a lot of native bees as
Huh.
well.
I wouldn't have even
Yeah,
thought that many
me either.
existed,
Me either.
let alone in Nebraska.
One of the questions I had when you were talking about like the importance of blooming and having stuff for like you've mentioned the pollinators and so like if someone doesn't know about what all that stuff means, how do you kind of like baseline educate?
That is a great question. And I'm very lucky to work with Nebraska Extension
Mhm.
because that's what we do. We're in that education business, and we do have a pollinator certified habitat program. And what that does is we help demystify it, because people like to go shopping with a list. If not, if you go, you can come home with stuff that you're
Yes.
not maybe not be successful with. But we have a list of plants out there that will help get you from blooming throughout all 3 seasons. So, but we also need a little bit of input on the owner as well to do a little bit of research and understanding. But we do have some certification process that has a really great concepts. People can get certified. They have their backyard certified as a pollinator habitat.
Oh.
But that's just a bonus. What we're
Uh-huh.
really wanting is people just to understand that if they need to use a pesticide, that they're spot treating, that we're not going out making rainbows and spraying
Yes.
everything.
Yeah.
That if we need to manage a pest, that we understand the pest, because sometimes when people bring us in damage, that insect is gone.
Mhm.
Short window of life me, and that it has already been done and did its job. But also to manage expectations, none of us are going to have that beautiful picturesque yard.
Mhm.
If we don't have holes in the leaves, then
Right.
our yard's not alive. So we also need to accept some of that damage.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I know I
Mhm.
kind of wavered on your question, but
No, I think that's perfect. I think the idea is like, if I don't understand, like the importance of having pollinators in our yard is just because it's important to continue.
right. It's we often forget that I believe it's 1 in 3 bites of food comes from a fruit or vegetable that's pollinated by an insect.
Right.
And so if we don't have bees, not
Mhm.
just honeybees, but if we don't have bees, I'm like our palette of food options is going to drastically shift.
Mhm.
And so we need to keep that in mind. And that and it's just good thing, I mean, good stories of the land. I mean,
Right.
insects were here first, so
Mhm.
we need
Right.
to remember that. And not all bees are bad. People have a fear of bees,
Yeah.
and if you leave them alone, they're going to leave you
Mhm.
alone. So
Yeah. Yeah, I was on the Nebraska Extension website just doing a little
Mhm.
bit of research, and there was a lot of helpful information on there. There was even like I think seminars you could.
yes, yes, we do a lot of outreach on different
Mhm.
seminars, and you can find that on our website. We have
Mhm.
different ones coming up. We call them lunch and learns.
Yes.
Uh, for some reason, it's like people like that noon to 1 o'clock period.
Uh-huh.
We try to shift to like evenings. Horrible attendance. It's
Right.
at noon to 1, so
Hmm.
it's really interesting.
Yeah.
They're free. You can just sign up. It's not neat, and they're all archived.
Okay.
So if there's something that we
Good.
talked about in the past, you could go back there on YouTube on all
Mhm.
that fun stuff.
Yeah.
Love that.
Good to know.
Hillary, I don't think we planned enough time for this episode,
No.
but I wonder if we can kind of wrap up with maybe one thing that you wish everyone knew about gardening and horticulture. Did I say that?
Yeah.
I'm just worst at like pronunciation today. But one thing that they might not know that they should.
When it comes to gardening, have fun, have low expectations. We're not Martha Stewart. We're not going to
Right.
have those picturesque yards, but and the biggest thing is that start rethinking about what a landscape should look like. We have been conditioned that it should be lush green
Yeah.
turf with some shrub roses and a tree. Messy is the new gardening.
Mhm.
Don't we need to start rethinking how we look at it, delay those spring cleanups, and that it doesn't have to be neat and tidy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because that's becoming more of a trend and like home interiors as well too is like things aren't perfect.
Lived
Like
in.
it's very
Yeah.
lived in. It doesn't have to be like catalog photo perfect. Like this is real life and we should
Yes,
embrace it.
yes, and but you'll make mistakes. That's fine.
Mhm.
Learn from those mistakes, but have fun,
Mhm.
and that's the most important thing. That just enjoy being outside and seeing what nature does,
Yeah.
and take time to actually look in your garden, because some of the tiniest insects are bees,
Mhm.
and we don't recognize them or we don't see them because they're so tiny. So
Mhm.
Wow.
actually spend a little bit of time out there just observing,
Yeah.
and you'll be quite amazed.
Admire all your hard work.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, thank you again, Scott. We're gonna have you back so that we can get to like the 12 other questions that
Yeah.
we had hoped to get to today. But thank you again for coming in and being our expert guest. I want to thank, of course, Becca and Hillary and our producer Scott and everyone who's listening. Remember to leave us a rating, a like, and smash that subscribe to the I Am Home wherever you listen. And then check out nfm.com and where you can shop 24/7 for everything outdoors and indoors too. And thanks again. And remember, home is what you make it.
Thanks for joining us today for I Am Home with Tyler Weisskopf, Hillary Woltemath, and Becca Sudbeck. No one knows home quite like NFM. So if you'd like more information on home design at NFM, please check out nfm.com and leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice.